I'm about to show you exactly how you can keep bread on your table without letting it wreak havoc on your blood sugar, turning a feared enemy back into a manageable part of your life. For years, you have likely been told that bread is the ultimate villain in your diabetes journey, a forbidden food that acts like pure poison to your glucose levels, leaving you feeling deprived at every family dinner or restaurant outing. This constant restriction creates a sense of isolation and frustration, making you wonder if living a healthy life means never enjoying a simple slice of toast again. I have seen hundreds of patients who, in an attempt to be perfect, eliminated every single carbohydrate from their diet, only to become miserable, stressed, and eventually binge eat the very foods they were trying to avoid. I remember Albert, a 74-year-old gentleman who confessed to me that he missed his Sunday morning toast more than anything else, and the stress of depriving himself was actually keeping his cortisol and his blood sugar higher than if he had just eaten the bread. His doctor might have given him a generic no white foods rule, but failed to explain that not all breads are created equal, and that how you prepare the bread matters just as much as the grain itself. Before we begin, a critical disclaimer. The information I'm sharing today is strictly for educational purposes and should not be considered medical advice. I am not your personal physician and cannot provide individualized medical guidance through this video. Never stop, start, or change any diabetes medication without first consulting with your doctor. 1. The freeze and toast method. The first and most surprising strategy you can use immediately is to change the temperature history of your bread before you eat it, specifically by freezing it first and then toasting it. This sounds too simple to be true, but it relies on a well-documented chemical process called retrogradation, which fundamentally alters how your body processes the starch in the bread. When you bake bread, the starch granules expand and become easy for your body to turn into sugar. However, when you cool that starch down significantly and then heat it up again, the molecular structure changes, becoming more resistant to digestion. This matters because this new structure is called resistant starch, meaning it resists being broken down in the small intestine and instead travels to the colon where it feeds good bacteria. For a senior with diabetes, this means that the slice of bread you just ate effectively has fewer absorbable calories and a lower glycemic impact than the exact same slice would have had if you ate it fresh from the oven. It is a way to chemically lower the sugar content of the food without changing the ingredients at all, simply by using your freezer as a tool. I recall a patient named Henry, a 76-year-old retired accountant who loved data and tracked his numbers religiously. He was skeptical when I told him to put his loaf in the freezer, but he decided to test it as an experiment. He ate 2 slices of fresh bread one morning and recorded a spike of 60 points. 2 days later, he ate 2 slices of the same bread that had been frozen for 24 hours and then toasted, and his spike was only 35 points. He was astounded that the simple act of temperature manipulation could give him that much of a buffer, allowing him to enjoy his breakfast without the guilt or the sluggish feeling that usually followed. The explanation for this lies in the crystallization of the starch molecules. Imagine the starch molecules in fresh bread are like loose, open chains that your digestive enzymes can easily snip apart into glucose. When you freeze the bread, those chains tighten up and bond together, forming a crystalline structure that is much harder for your enzymes to cut. Even when you toast it afterwards, a significant portion of that crystalline structure remains intact, meaning a percentage of that bread passes through you without ever turning into blood sugar. To do this correctly, you must buy your bread and immediately place the entire loaf in the freezer for at least 12 to 24 hours. It needs this duration to ensure the retrogradation process is complete throughout the crumb of the bread. When you are ready to eat, take out a slice and put it directly into the toaster from the frozen state. Do not let it thaw on the counter, as toasting it directly seems to preserve the resistant starch effect most effectively while giving you a pleasant texture. This simple habit turns your freezer into a metabolic ally, lowering the impact of your meal before you even take a bite. 2. Traditional sourdough bread. You should seriously consider switching from standard yeast-risen bread to authentic, long-fermented sourdough bread. The magic of sourdough lies not in the sour taste, but in the fermentation process, which acts as a form of pre-digestion. In traditional sourdough, wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria work on the dough for many hours, sometimes days, before it is baked. During this time, these microorganisms consume a significant amount of the carbohydrates and gluten in the flour to fuel their own growth, leaving less sugar behind for your body to absorb. This matters because the organic acids produced during this fermentation, specifically lactic acid, naturally slow down the rate at which your stomach empties into your small intestine. This delayed gastric emptying means that whatever glucose is left in the bread enters your bloodstream as a slow trickle rather than a sudden flood. For a senior managing diabetes, this difference in speed is everything. It allows your body's natural insulin response, or your medication, to keep up with the incoming sugar, preventing that sharp spike that leads to nerve damage and fatigue. I remember dealing with a patient named Eleanor, 72, who had resigned herself to eating lettuce wraps because every time she touched whole wheat bread, her numbers skyrocketed. She missed the texture and comfort of bread, especially with her morning eggs. I suggested she try a high-quality sourdough from a local bakery that fermented their dough for 48 hours. She was nervous, but she tried one slice. To her amazement, her 2-hour post-meal reading was perfectly within range. She learned that it wasn't just bread that was the problem, but the fast-acting commercial yeast used in most supermarket loaves. The explanation involves the biological warfare that happens during fermentation. The bacteria in the sourdough culture produce organic acids that lower the pH of the bread. This acidity inhibits the enzymes in your saliva and stomach that usually break down starch rapidly. Furthermore, the bacteria literally eat the simple sugars, essentially sanitizing the bread of its most dangerous components before it ever reaches your plate. It creates a food product that is biochemically distinct from a standard loaf of white or wheat bread. To implement this, you must be a detective in the grocery aisle, or, better yet, find a local bakery. Many supermarket breads labeled sourdough are simply regular white bread with vinegar or artificial sour flavoring added to mimic the taste. You want to look for ingredients that list simply flour, water, salt, and starter, or culture. If you see yeast listed as a primary ingredient, it is likely a fake sourdough that has not undergone the long fermentation process necessary to lower the blood sugar impact. This choice allows you to enjoy the comfort of bread with a built-in biological buffer that protects your blood sugar. 3. Sprouted grain bread. The third option you should look for is bread made from sprouted grains, often found in the freezer section of your grocery store. The difference here is between a dormant seed and a living plant. Regular flour is made by grinding up dry, dormant wheat berries, which are essentially little storage packets of starch waiting to grow. Sprouted bread is made from grains that have been soaked in water and allowed to begin the sprouting process before being mashed into dough. This transitions the grain from a starch bomb into a vegetable-like state. This matters because when a grain sprouts, it breaks down its own starch stores to use as energy to grow the new shoot. This means the carbohydrate content naturally drops, while the availability of protein, vitamins, and minerals increases. For a senior, this is a 2-for-1 benefit. You get a bread that has a lower impact on your blood sugar, and you also get higher nutrient absorption, which is critical as digestion becomes less efficient with age. The increased protein and fiber content further act to slow down digestion, keeping you full longer and preventing the crash that triggers sugar cravings. I think of a patient named Clara, 68, who struggled with constant hunger. She would eat a sandwich on whole wheat bread at noon, and by 2 p.m. she was shaking and looking for a snack because her blood sugar had spiked and then plummeted. This roller coaster was exhausting her. We switched her to a flourless sprouted grain bread like the Ezekiel brand. She reported that the nutty texture took some getting used to, but for the first time in years, she felt satisfied until dinner. The bread was acting more like a slow-burning log on a fire rather than kindling. The explanation is that the enzymatic activity in the sprouting process breaks down anti-nutrients, like phytic acid, which normally block the absorption of minerals. More importantly, it alters the ratio of amylose to amylopectin, the two types of starch, making the bread have a lower glycemic index. A slice of sprouted bread might have a glycemic index of 45, whereas a standard slice of whole wheat could be closer to 70. In the world of diabetes management, that difference is the gap between a healthy reading and a dangerous spike. To find this bread, do not look in the standard bread aisle. Because sprouted bread contains no preservatives and is made from living food, it spoils very quickly at room temperature. Therefore, it is almost always sold in the freezer section of the grocery store. You will need to keep it frozen at home and toast it as needed. Common brands include Ezekiel 49, Dave's Killer Bread, check the label for sprouted, or Alvarado Street Bakery. This switch upgrades your sandwich from a simple starch to a nutrient-dense meal that supports steady energy. 4. Heavy German pumpernickel. The fourth bread option is one that requires you to appreciate density. True, heavy German-style pumpernickel. I am not referring to the soft, brown-colored deli bread you might get at a steakhouse, which is usually just white flour dyed with molasses or caramel color. I am talking about the dense, brick-like loaves that are often sold in thin, rectangular packages, usually imported from Germany. This bread is made from coarse rye kernels, rye berries, that are barely ground, meaning the physical particle size of the grain is very large. This matters because digestion is essentially a process of your body trying to break food down into tiny particles. When you eat fluffy white bread, the particles are already microscopic, so they turn to sugar instantly. When you eat coarse pumpernickel, your digestive system has to work very hard to break down the intact kernels. This physical barrier acts like a time-release capsule for carbohydrates. The sugar is released so slowly that your body can easily manage the influx, often resulting in a flat line on a glucose monitor rather than a mountain peak. I recall a patient named Hans, 75, who had moved to the US from Europe and developed type 2 diabetes. He had stopped eating his traditional foods, thinking they were bad for him. When we discussed his diet, he mentioned missing the real bread from home. I encouraged him to go back to the authentic, heavy rye breads he grew up with. He was skeptical, but when he tried it, he found that one thin slice of this dense bread was incredibly satisfying and barely moved his glucose meter. He realized that the fluffy American wheat bread was the problem, not the grain itself. The explanation lies in the intact cellular structure of the rye. Because the grain isn't pulverized into a fine powder, the enzymes in your stomach can only attack the outer surface of the particles. It takes hours for the enzymes to work their way through the whole kernel. Additionally, rye contains a specific type of fiber called arabinoxylan, which creates a viscous gel in the stomach, further slowing down the movement of food. This is one of the few breads where the mechanical structure of the food is just as important as the chemical composition. To choose this correctly, you must read the label and feel the weight of the package. The package should feel heavy for its size, like a small brick. The first ingredient should be whole rye kernels, or coarse rye meal. If the first ingredient is wheat flour and it lists caramel color, put it back. True pumpernickel is steamed at a low temperature for a long time, giving it a natural dark color and a distinct earthy flavor. This bread offers a robust, satisfying option that works with your digestion rather than overwhelming it. 5. Almond or flax flour bread. For those of you who find that even the heartiest rye or the most fermented sourdough still spikes your glucose beyond your comfort zone, you must look outside the world of grains entirely and explore breads made from nut or seed flours. These are not technically bread in the botanical sense, but culinary engineered alternatives using almond flour, coconut flour, or ground flax seeds to mimic the structure of a loaf without the starch payload. This is the ultimate safety net for seniors with very high insulin resistance who need to keep their carbohydrate intake near zero but cannot imagine life without a vehicle for their turkey and cheese. This matters because these ingredients are primarily made of healthy fats and fiber, with almost no net carbohydrates to convert into sugar. When you eat a slice of almond flour bread, your body does not require an insulin surge to process it because there is no glucose spike to manage. You are essentially eating a handful of nuts in the shape of a slice of bread. This allows you to maintain the ritual of a sandwich, the texture, the holding mechanism, the convenience, while completely opting out of the blood sugar roller coaster. It is the best way to trick your brain into feeling satisfied without compromising your metabolic goals. I remember a patient named Jim, a 67-year-old truck driver who relied on sandwiches for his meals on the road. He had tried to switch to salads but found them impossible to eat while driving, so he kept going back to white bread and his A1C kept climbing. We introduced him to a flaxseed-based bread that he could bake at home on weekends or buy online. He was skeptical that birdseed could taste good, but he found that once it was toasted and topped with mustard and meat, he hardly noticed the difference. The biggest change, however, was his energy. He no longer felt the sleepy carb coma at 2 p.m. behind the wheel, making his driving safer and his health better. The explanation is simple biochemistry. Wheat flour is a chain of glucose molecules. Almond and flax flours are matrices of fats and proteins. Fat has a negligible effect on insulin secretion compared to starch. Additionally, flax seeds are incredibly rich in mucilage, a type of gel-forming fiber that coats the lining of the digestive tract and slows down the absorption of any other sugars present in the meal. You are effectively building a wall against blood sugar spikes with the bread itself. To implement this, you have two paths. You can purchase commercial brands often found in the gluten-free or paleo freezer section. Look for brands like Base Culture or Unbun. Alternatively, these breads are incredibly easy to make at home because they don't require kneading or rising time since there is no yeast or gluten. A simple 90-second bread recipe using almond flour, an egg, and baking powder in the microwave can give you an instant English muffin alternative that is diabetic friendly. This option removes the glucose variable from your meal entirely, giving you total control. 6. The vinegar appetizer. You can utilize a powerful biochemical trick called the vinegar appetizer to actively blunt the blood sugar response of any bread you choose to eat. This involves consuming 1 tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, or any vinegar, diluted in a tall glass of water about 10 to 15 minutes before your meal. It sounds like an old wives' tale, but it is one of the most chemically validated strategies we have in nutritional science. The acetic acid in the vinegar acts as a temporary brake on your digestion, specifically targeting the enzymes that break down starch. This matters because when you inhibit these enzymes, specifically alpha amylase, the bread you eat passes through your stomach more slowly and is broken down into glucose at a much more gradual rate. Studies have shown that this simple acid addition can reduce the post-meal glucose spike by up to 30%. It is essentially a liquid medication found in your pantry that lowers the glycemic index of your entire meal. For a senior who wants to enjoy a dinner roll at a restaurant without ruining their morning numbers, this is a discreet and effective safety valve. I recall a patient named Maria, 70, who loved going out to Italian dinners with her family, but would always come home with a blood sugar reading over 200, which terrified her. She felt she had to choose between social joy and her health. I advised her to order a salad with extra vinegar dressing as her first course, or simply drink water with a splash of lemon or vinegar before the bread basket arrived. She tried the vinegar shot before her next pasta night and was shocked to see her reading stay under 160. She realized she had a tool to dampen the impact of her occasional indulgences. The explanation lies in how acetic acid interacts with your stomach's emptying rate and your muscle tissue. First, it slows the rush of food from the stomach to the small intestine. Second, and perhaps more interestingly, it seems to increase the uptake of glucose into your skeletal muscles. It essentially opens the side doors of your muscles so they can soak up the sugar from the bread, leaving less of it to float around in your blood. It is a dual action mechanism, slowing the source and increasing the disposal. To do this correctly, mix 1 tablespoon of organic apple cider vinegar into at least 8 ounces of water. Do not drink it straight, as the acid can be harsh on your throat and tooth enamel over time. Drink this mixture right before you sit down to eat, or sip it as you begin your meal. If you cannot stand the taste of drinking it, eating a starter salad with a heavy vinaigrette dressing achieves a similar effect, provided the dressing isn't full of sugar. A caution is necessary for those who have been diagnosed with gastroparesis, delayed stomach emptying, which is a complication of long-term diabetes. Because vinegar slows emptying further, it could make your condition worse. If you have slow stomach issues, skip this step. Also, rinse your mouth with plain water afterwards to protect your teeth from the acid. This simple liquid appetizer acts as a chemical shield, dampening the spike before it begins. 7. The fat barrier topping rule. You must strictly adhere to the rule of never eating naked carbohydrates. Every piece of bread you consume must be coated with a healthy fat or protein barrier. Eating a slice of dry toast is one of the worst things you can do for your blood sugar because there is nothing to impede the enzymes from turning that bread into sugar instantly. It is like pouring water through a funnel with no filter. It rushes through. By adding a layer of fat, you create a physical and chemical obstacle course that the digestive enzymes must navigate, significantly slowing down the release of glucose. This matters because fat is the hardest and slowest macronutrient to digest. When you combine fat with starch, for example, mashing avocado onto your toast or spreading real butter on your sourdough, your stomach detects the fat and sends a hormonal signal to the pyloric valve to close slightly. This slows down the entire digestive assembly line. The bread sits in your stomach longer, mixing with the fat, and enters the intestine in small, manageable amounts rather than a massive dump of sugar. I think of a patient named Susan, 65, who believed she was being healthy by eating dry whole wheat toast with her tea, thinking she was saving calories and helping her heart, yet her blood sugar would spike sharply every morning. She was confused because she thought light eating was better. I told her to add a thick layer of smashed avocado or even a pat of grass-fed butter to that toast. She was terrified of the calories but tried it. Her spike disappeared. The added fat slowed the absorption so effectively that her body could handle the carb load without panic. The explanation is based on gastric emptying time. Carbohydrates leave the stomach the fastest, followed by protein, followed by fat. By mixing them, the meal takes on the speed of the slowest component. Furthermore, healthy fats like olive oil or avocado are vital for absorbing fat-soluble vitamins like the vitamin D we discussed in other videos. So you are getting a double benefit: better blood sugar control and better nutrient absorption. To implement this, visualize a 1-to-1 ratio of volume. If you have a slice of bread, you should have a substantial layer of topping. Good options include avocado, almond butter, real butter, avoid margarine, which is inflammatory, cream cheese, or dipping the bread in olive oil. Even adding a slice of turkey or an egg on top creates this buffering effect. The goal is to never let the bread touch your stomach lining alone. A caution here is to choose your fats wisely. While fat slows sugar absorption, bad fats, trans fats, vegetable oils like soybean or corn oil, can increase inflammation and insulin resistance in the long run. Stick to natural, unprocessed fats found in nature: avocados, nuts, seeds, olive oil, and dairy fats if you tolerate them. This rule transforms your bread from a fast-acting sugar pill into a slow-release energy source. 8. The 15-minute movement window. Finally, the most effective mechanical lever you have is to move your body within a specific window after eating your bread, ideally starting about 15 to 30 minutes after your last bite. This strategy uses your largest muscle groups, your legs, as a sponge to soak up the glucose entering your bloodstream. When you eat bread, the sugar hits your blood fairly quickly. If you are sitting in a recliner, that sugar has nowhere to go and piles up, causing a high reading. If you are walking, your muscles actively pull that sugar out of the blood to use for fuel, bypassing the need for high insulin levels. This matters because muscle contraction triggers a separate pathway for glucose uptake that doesn't rely entirely on insulin. This is called insulin-independent glucose uptake. For a senior whose insulin system might be sluggish or resistant, this is like having a manual override switch. You can physically force the sugar out of your blood by simply contracting your thigh and calf muscles. It turns the bread you just ate into immediate energy for movement rather than stored fat or high blood sugar. I remember a couple, Robert and Linda, both in their 70s, who loved to have a bagel on Sunday mornings but were afraid of the health consequences. We established a new rule for their household, the post-toast walk. They agreed that they could enjoy their bagel, but only if they immediately put on their sneakers and walked for 20 minutes afterwards. They found that not only did their blood sugar stay flat, often not rising above 120, but they felt more energetic and less stiff for the rest of the day. The walk negated the bagel. The explanation involves the GLUT4 transporter proteins in your muscle cells. Normally, these transporters stay inside the cell and only come to the surface when insulin calls them. However, muscle contraction also forces these transporters to the surface to grab fuel. By walking briskly, you are opening thousands of little doors in your leg muscles, inviting the glucose from the bread to enter and be burned off instantly. It is the most direct way to spend the carbohydrate currency you just earned. To do this, you do not need to run a marathon or go to a gym. A simple, steady pace, walking the dog, marching in place while watching TV, or doing household chores like vacuuming is sufficient. The key is timing. You want to be moving when the digestion is hitting its peak, which is usually 30 to 45 minutes after you start eating. By starting your movement at the 15-minute mark, you intercept the spike before it peaks. A caution is to listen to your body and not exercise so vigorously that you cause indigestion. A gentle walk is perfect. High-intensity interval training on a full stomach is not. Also, if you take rapid-acting insulin with your meal, be careful as the combination of insulin plus walking can sometimes drop your sugar too low. Monitor your levels until you know how your body reacts. This habit ensures that the bread you eat serves a purpose, fueling your life rather than burdening your system. You now have a complete protocol for reintroducing bread safely. Freeze it to change its chemistry, choose fermented or sprouted options, shield it with vinegar and healthy fats, and burn it off with movement. You do not have to live a life of deprivation where the bakery is a forbidden zone. By applying these scientific levers, temperature, fermentation, density, pairing, and timing, you can turn a potential enemy into a manageable, enjoyable part of your diet. It is about eating smarter, not just restricting harder. If you found these tips helpful, or if you know someone over 50 who has given up bread unnecessarily, please share this video with them and subscribe for more simple, research-backed health tips.